Welcome back to our Closing Gaps by Opening Spaces vlog series, and for our final episode in the Closing Gaps by Opening Spaces series. It's been my sincere hope that you have been able to reflect on the value of what we've been talking about in this series, which is intentional and impactful leadership practices. Our goal has always been to prioritize this conversation and challenge you, the leader, to consider how you might close gaps for all of your students, and in particular, those students with disabilities, by opening those spaces that results in that's right, their access to success. Now, as we've shared throughout this series, this is growth mindset learning and it's growth mindset leading. And more importantly, it's bold. It's a belief that our leader shift makes the difference. So I invite you to continue to lean in as we discuss this incredibly important work that we get to do. Let's keep growing and leading, and let's jump right into our conversation. We're on the air. Now, I had an opportunity to read in the spring several really good articles in the March edition of the ASCD Ed Leadership publication, appropriately titled The Adaptive Leader. And many of you probably read those publications as well. Um, there were some additional articles online in their March PL series as well. And there were articles on leader equity. And then there were some articles on coaching, two priority topics for our conversation in this vlog episode. I want to take a moment, though, to invite the word restorative into our thoughts for today's final conversation as well. So we've got three words: right? Equity, coaching, and restorative. Now, ponder this question for a moment. What is one word that serves as a common thread between each of these? Yep, individuals. So think about this. Equity is individual centered. It's not about what we all need. It's centered on what an individual, in our conversation, what that individual student needs in order to access success. Coaching is individual cultivated. Effective coaching helps cultivate and foster an individual's growth so that teachers can access success. And let's talk about restorative. It's individual connected. Now, I think of restorative circles in a sense. And restorative circles help connect individuals through active listening, mutual respect, and it helps form healthy relationships so that schools can access success. Right? And as I reflect on this, I can't help but think about the individual students, staff, leaders in schools whom I've had the opportunity to serve for almost 20 years now. And there are so many people. The list is too long that I want to thank. But I do want to first thank, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not about to give an award speech, but I do challenge you to think about those students whose individual needs are met through an equity focused approach to your instructional leadership. I want you to think about those individual teachers whose instructional practices are cultivated through the individual coaching session that you lead. And I want you to think about the individual staff and student connections that are built and repaired through your leadership of a restorative culture. Mhm. So, we end this vlog series with the final driver and the final design, which are two of the most important in our Mighty Eight Lead Embrace framework. In fact, we end this series with the beginning in mind in some ways because these two leader shifts are ones that I would prioritize first. So let's do this. You may recall our eight mighty leadership moves, those core four drivers that support instructional excellence. The first one that we talked about was targeted times for thorough talks. Then we talked about those TTE supplies, those templates, those tools, and those exemplars. And then we talked about professional development for me, for my engagement, for your teacher's individual engagement, for their growth. Well, today we're going to talk about coaching OT, not over time, although coaching in those pivotal moments of a game are really impactful on the outcomes. In similar ways, however, this fourth driver is coaching based on observation of tier one instruction. So hold on to that thought about tier one instruction because we're going to unpack that a little bit later. And then you may remember the core four designs that sustain instructional excellence. Remember, we talked about building capacity for our heads and our leads. Then we talked about the action plan, GPS, the clear and observable expectations, and then monitoring that for accountability. Then we talked about the logic of logistics, right? The scheduling for impact. Well, today we're going to talk about creating a culture of caring and its impact on everything that you do. Now, as we've always done in this series, let's unpack that driver of support called OT, coaching OT, and the design that can sustain co-teaching excellence called a culture of caring. And we unpack it by looking at our whoa, the what, the how, other things to consider. And we do all of this before we make a move, before we act. Right? So, what is coaching? Well, coaching, simply put, is a process that leads to continued growth for individuals and for schools. It's a results focused thought partnership, and it's a success partnership. It's a cycle of support designed to improve student learning and effective teaching. And as Jim Knight puts it, it's not a buzzword. Now, when we talk about coaching OT, it's observing and then it's providing feedback on how to improve tier one instruction. Now, how does this look? Well, as a leader, I was intentional in creating a coaching space. Teachers knew when we met, this was not a counseling session. It was not a conference. It wasn't. It was an opportunity to coach them to growth. And I designed our coaching space in a way that ensured that coaching happened, right? But more than a physical coaching space, as you may have thought, however, coaching and providing feedback is a space and a place where we are guiding teachers through a support cycle of identifying specific practices and student gaps, and then determining how best to improve teaching and learning. Now, I won't go into details of what Sherry St. Clair calls the mechanics of coaching, but I will say this. There are obviously many effective coaching models that you may utilize. And as you work to improve, in particular, the learning outcomes for students with disabilities, as you coach co-teaching teams, here's what I will say. I want you to view it through the lens of tier one instruction and with an eye on specially designed instruction and those practices that remove the barriers so that those students can access the learning. Notice I didn't say with the lens of what co-teaching models. And sometimes that's exactly where we get tangled in perhaps the finer details of insignificance rather than the greater things of impact, like student engagement during tier one instruction and specially designed instruction that helps students access learning. Right? Paul Bangbert says this. The primary purpose of observation should not be to judge the quality of teaching, but to find the most effective ways to coach them to improve student learning. Now, here's some other things to consider. Consider your observation and coaching feedback system. Consider the lens and the attention given to effective feedback and coaching that is specific to tier one instruction for co-teaching teams. That's it. Reflect on that. Now, before you take action and make a leader move, determine, however, if this is the driver that you need to support the work in your building. Okay. Now, let's shift and unpack the design that can help sustain co teaching excellence in your building, which is a culture of care. And we're going to whoa, take a look at what this is. How does this look? Other things to consider before we act. So, what is culture? Or what is a culture of care? Well, first, let me just say that culture is not just important, culture is everything. And culture impacts everyone. And culture is the way you do things, right? So, as you design your culture, it should be designed in a way that creates a restorative environment, a relational environment, and a responsive environment. Now, I will not attempt to preach to the choir or demean your level of intelligence and professionalism. You know what culture is, right? But we know that when we are intentional in designing our culture around those themes, it helps improve relationships. Mm. So, how does a culture of care look? Well, a caring culture looks like a place of belonging for all. It looks like a respectful environment. It looks like a place of accountability. It looks like a place where harm is repaired and relationships are restored. It looks like a collaborative space and a cooperative space. Um, and it looks like it permeates every aspect of teaching and learning in a positively impactful way, including, that's right, co teaching excellence. That's what we've been talking about. And the learning of our students with disabilities. So here's some other things to consider. Consider your culture. Is culture important, or is it everything for you? And is it designed in a way that it positively impacts everyone? Really, that's it. Reflect on that. Now, before you take action and make a leader move, determine if this is the design you need to help sustain the work in your building. What does the culture look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like in your building? And how is that impacting co teaching relationships, co planning, and co teaching? Because these things impact the outcomes for our students with disabilities. Now, I am, I've enjoyed connecting with you in this series and connecting you to a framework in this series that has been really helpful for me in my leading this work in my building. And in conversations that I've had with other leaders, they too recognize that this framework also makes sense in leading this work around improving outcomes for all students, and in particular, our students with disabilities. So let's continue to be impactful and let's continue to be intentional as we lead this work of co teaching excellence. And I'm confident that if we open those spaces, then we will be well on our way to closing those gaps for our students and providing them access to success. Now, join me for our new and upcoming vlog series where we really lean in and highlight the top 10 leader moves for each driver and design. And we'll be answering the question, how do we stay fit to lead this work? Are we focused? Are we intentional? And are we tracking our work? Are we measuring our impact? It's that act part of, whoa, the goal is the same. I want to put these practical tools in your hands so that you can prioritize the work around inclusion, access, and equity, and then work on the work of inclusion, access, and equity. So be sure to check that out. It's coming fall of 2022. We're excited to connect with you then. And until that time, have a great end of the school year. Have a great beginning of the school year, and we'll see you soon.